time for another edition of the World Edition. We're going to get ready to have our special guest who has joined us. Definitely Sparrow Hart will be coming on, and we'll be learning his thoughts around how some of the successful might be successful because of some of the substances that they are using and all along those lines. So we'll get to that conversation. But first, let me just tell you about a couple of things that are going on in the world, and then I'll bring in Sparrow who can share a little bit of his research and thoughts around some of the success mechanisms around some of the very much elite, whether that is Elon Musk or a number of others as well. But definitely, it looks like North Korea's Kim has gone out there and showed off a banned missile to the one of the Russian ministers. So that is what they did as they were marking 70 years of armistice and all in that space. So North Korea, China, and Russia were commemorating that victory 70 years ago, while Russia is still involved in that fight with Ukraine, and definitely will be interested to see where their allies, or at least those perceived allies, are definitely fitting in with that particular war and all along that kind of space. So that's definitely something that I saw in the news. There is something that I was wondering if Shaquille, if he was here, he could tell us about, but apparently there are the last of nearly 100 whales that were beached in Australia have been euthanized despite the massive protests that were taking place in that area. And apparently they were stranded, and definitely that is what they decided to do in that particular case. And a fire is still burning on board a car carrying cargo ship near a sensitive Dutch bird habitat. So definitely it does look like the things going on in the wildlife lanes are not all that great and all in that space. Getting back to Russia and Ukraine, isolated Putin is trying to shore up his African support as the Kremlin is seasoned over the poor summit and all in that space. So apparently they did not have a great summit in that kind of way. And I'll be interested to hear what went on. And I might find some other people from those African nations that might come on and share some of their thoughts about what was going on when that was taking place. And soldiers are saying that the Niger's president, Mohamed Bassam, has been removed. So that is over there where there has been a coup. So they have declared a coup on national TV. So that national TV over there is something that we are seeing. And over there in Singapore, they are set to execute the first woman in nearly 20 years, according to some human rights groups and all in that space. So that is going to happen for the first time in 20 years. And there is a legend of music, or at least a one that got a lot of notoriety, both as an activist as well as a singer, but she passed away. That was the acclaimed Irish singer Sinead O'Connor, who died at the age of 56. And apparently she took on everybody from parts of the Florida establishments to the Pope to a number of other things. I think she even might have had some conversations with Joe Pesci and others. So she was definitely a very much of a advocate, and very much of a advocate for a number of causes. And Nigeria apparently stunned the co-host Australia to deliver the first major shock at the Women's World Cup. So I do know that the co-hosts are Australia and New Zealand, but Nigeria has pulled off an upset. And actually, the U.S. was in a tough draw as well. They ended in a 1-1 tie. So that was what happened when they took on the Netherlands. So some of these other opponents are not exactly going by lightly. And I had actually said that I thought Netherlands would be a tough match when I was talking to some friends of mine in the last day or two. So definitely that is something that I was seeing as well, that could be a hard match to deal with. And Emmanuel Macron has denounced new imperialism in the Pacific on his historic visit to Vanuatu. So that is something that we are seeing as well. So he was going over there and making a trip. So the French president tells separatists to accept the pro-France votes. So that is something that is going on. And we're wondering about the impact of weather. Well, deadly wildfires in Greece and other European countries are destroying homes and threatening a lot of folks in that space as well. So that is something that we are seeing, and we'll get to some other news of the world as well as news of the United States and all along those lines. But first, I want to bring in my special guest, none other than Sparrow Hart. How are you doing, Sparrow? Glad that you were able to come. I know we were trying to get you on last week or a couple of days ago and all in that kind of line, but I know that part of your research has been around how some of the rich and famous are actually using psychedelics and other things to have their success. So I'd love to hear more about what you've been researching and what you've found when you've looked at folks like Elon Musk and some of the others that are out there, because it seems like they might be having success and using some enhancement tools in that space. But if you can just tell a little bit about your research, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation, and maybe we'll bring on Lee Newton Rhodes, Jacoby, and some of the others as well.
Well, okay. I can't say in particular I've been doing research into Elon Musk and whoever, but I certainly, when you say enhancements, I mean,
Right.
I think basically we're talking psychedelics and
Right.
things like that. And I've certainly been done a lot of research into psychedelics. For 35 years. I've led Vision Quests, which are, which are these very powerful 11-day ceremonies in wilderness that involve fasting and solitude, and that was my start in introducing and becoming, because those produce an altered state. It's
Right.
one that's very different, but it is very altered. And I mean, starting when I was 20, I went to college in the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 60s. So, God, it was hard to miss. Certainly back in those times, the shopping bag said, "Just say yes."
Do you
But,
think more people are doing that now? Because I know during the whole nature of the pandemic and a lot of other things that were going on in our world, a lot of people were turning to wellness and turning to different tools in order to get better. And I do know that I've got some friends that have looked at everything from cannabis to psychedelics to a number of other things to better themselves in some way or another. So I just wondered, do you think that that is something that we saw an uptick in during the last 3 years with the pandemic and just in society in general? Because we do have a very much of a gratitude, or not gratitude, but a folks that want instant gratification. That was the word I was looking for, gratification. And a lot of times people will try to find a tool to help get to that gratification, whatever that tool is, in trying to help that instant success. But I was just wondering, do you think we're seeing an uptick in the use of psychedelic drugs?
oh yeah, totally. I'm totally. There's an uptick in it. It's obviously it's been legalized in certain parts of the. I think if you live in Oregon, you can advertise psychedelic workshops. Or I think it's Oregon and Denver and a few other places. I mean, you can go on Netflix and watch the series "How to Change Your Mind," which is about it's a 4-part series, and part one's on LSD, part two I think is on mushrooms, psilocybin. One part, I think it's probably 3, is on MDMA, or which was more commonly known as ecstasy, and maybe part 4 was on peyote. But yeah, it's out there everywhere. A lot of, it's being researched by the National Institute of Mental Health. In fact, MDA is in its stage 3 clinical trials, and certainly the way this is going, I think MDMA will be approved and become a legal and approved treatment for, especially around the issues of post-traumatic stress, because it's had such a profound and excellent trials in especially among veterans, war veterans, but post-traumatic stress isn't just limited to war veterans. It's for anyone who's been, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, all of that. It's certainly it's becoming recognized as one of probably the most effective treatment for post-traumatic stress. So A lot of this is certainly in terms of in which of these substances you might use might depend on your needs, your intentions. So if you're dealing with post-traumatic stress and anxiety, that might lead one direction. If you're some kind of creative artist and just want to get in touch with a much bigger bandwidth of your creativity, that might more lead to something like psilocybin um, or ayahuasca or something like this. But yeah, it's coming, it's
Yeah,
growing, and
it sounds like it's coming and growing. And I know that there was the article, and that's what I was kind of alluding to. And I know that the agency that directed you to us and everything had mentioned it in y'all's PR statement, which is apparently that there was a recent Wall Street Journal that reported that some of the Silicon Valley's biggest movers and shakers regularly are using these substances to turn on, tune in, and drop out. And that's why I mentioned Elon Musk. I know that they say that he microdoses ketamine for his depression, while apparently the Google founder, Sergey Brin, enjoys magic mushroom parties. And I know a lot of other people have even talked about some of the ways of these parties being part of the power structure that goes on in the United States, whether that's in politics or in entertainment or in a number of other things. So that's what I was referring to at the beginning and everything. So what are some of these ones that are very much popular? Like when I first read that, I'm going like, I'm not exactly sure what ketamine is. I have an idea. I definitely remember the LSD era of the 60s and all in that space. So I'm very much familiar with that one, but I'm not as familiar with ketamine or psilocybin, which is apparently two other ones that exist as well. So definitely if you can share a little bit about what those are and how they might be used and how people might be using them to better themselves.
Yeah, well, probably I'll start with psilocybin because that's only easiest and it's the only one I'm familiar with. And psilocybin, was kind of introduced into Western culture in 1954. And back then, one of the biggest publications in the country was Life magazine. And there was this article that came out, many pages, big spread called "Exploring the Magic Mushrooms of Mexico." And this guy Gordon Wasson went down to Mexico and met this teacher healer named Marina Sabrina, and she introduced him to the quote magic mushrooms. So, and essentially the molecule in the magic mushrooms is psilocybin. Now there's a lot of different strains of, and psilocybin cubensis is basically most of the mushrooms have in them psilocybin cubensis, and of course there are many strains of mushrooms with different strengths of that molecule. And so, but anyway, psilocybin is a sense you could use the word psilocybin and mushrooms almost interchangeably.
Okay. That makes sense. I've definitely heard of the term mushrooms and everything. You also have your own company, Circles of Air and Stone, and definitely those quests for vision. So I'd love to hear more about that, and I'm sure our audience would as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll bring in my fellow panelists, and they may have some thoughts and questions as well. But I did see that was based there in Vermont and all along that kind of space. But if you'll share a little bit about what that work is for you.
Yeah, I'm based in Vermont. I live in Vermont. I'm sitting in Vermont right now, but Circles of Air and Stone is a company I started in 1987, and I started particularly initially just leading vision quests. And so a vision quest is essentially a vision quest is a process that includes three elements. But if your audience hasn't heard the phrase vision quest before, the simplest way to talk about a vision quest is to say it involves solitude, nature, and fasting. So so in terms of what might be familiar to your audience, Christ went into the desert and fasted for 40 days and nights. That was a vision quest. He went into nature, the desert, and he fasted. Solitude, nature, the desert, and fasted. 500 years before Christ, the story was Buddha walked into the jungle, walked into the forest and sat down under the Bodhi tree and fasted and became illumined, enlightenment. That was a vision quest, what Buddha did. In 600 AD, Muhammad went into a cave and fasted to contact his God. That was a vision quest. And there's certainly many tales of Native Americans. In fact, one of the most famous books about Native American was called Black Elk Speaks, in which he talked about his life and the many vision quests he went on. So anyway, nature, and nature could be the desert, the forest, the canyons, the mountains. Someone goes to nature and leaves behind. It's essentially leaving behind all of the world. You're far away from your cell phones. You're far away from books and entertainment. So it's just you in this much larger force, nature. And most of our lives, we live in a world that human beings have created. I look at you and I see you you're in a room. There's some kind of a window frame behind me. You see me. There's a blanket behind. All of these things in the visual are human created, and most everything we deal with all day are our own creations. Roads, airports, we listen to playlists. The whole environment we live in is human created. But all of a sudden to leave that behind and just be in nature without all of that. And nature is not a world humans created. Actually, to be honest, nature is what created humans. It might have taken like 800 million years or whatever it took, but nature created humans. And so a vision quest is leaving behind all of this that we've created and going into a world that created us, and going without food and without entertainment, and fasting, which fasting itself induces an altered state. So,
yeah, I would argue that it's something. I'm going to bring Lee Newton Rose, Jacoby McDuffie, and Shaquille into the conversation. Sasha may be coming as well, Shirley. But I would argue that a lot of people during this pandemic have probably been going through a lot of connecting with nature and definitely rediscovering themselves, and probably been going on their own versions of vision quest, whatever those may be. But I was just wondering your take on that. Do you think that we are seeing a rise in people that are wanting to find themselves and find themselves through these kind of journeys?
Well, I would think so. I think one of the things the pandemic brought up for a lot of people is just stress, and the whole question of, within that whole stress is, what am I really here for? What's the purpose of all of this? I mean, do I want to continue to do? I mean, every person has their own version of, I guess the common term is the rat race. All the things I got to do and should do that somebody outside of me tells me I need to do to be is that really what I'm here for? And certainly the pandemic kind of heightened the whole thing, as we were kind of in this little pressure cooker of whether that was at home or whatever, or we saw all the goals we were have been spending decades or whatever trying to achieve, all of a sudden, boom, they were gone. And so, and certainly that longing for something deeper, richer, more connected to our souls or spirit, I think, came up big for a lot of people in the depression, in the pandemic. It's funny, I said depression instead of pandemic, but depression really went way up during the pandemic. But anyway, those are my thoughts, that it really highlighted, what am I doing here? Is this all there is?
Yeah, no doubt. Shaquille, have you ever been on a vision quest, or Jacoby? And do you have any questions? I know you're over there in Australia, so maybe you've been on one of these vision quests as well, or maybe you've been having some thoughts around those whales that I mentioned earlier, because I was saying that you might come in and have some thoughts around that was going on, but have you been on one of these vision quests that I know are part of a lot of different cultures and all of that land, and definitely Jacoby also?
I'll neither confirm nor deny any usage of any illicit substances, Mark. But to Sparrow's comment about the pandemic, to me, I think it showed really how full of shit people are, because you always heard people say, if I just had more time to exercise, I wish I had more time to spend with the kids. And as soon as they got locked down, they all complained. They didn't go out and exercise more. They ended up drinking more. I'm a culprit for that. They didn't end up liking the time they spent with their kids. They hated every minute of it and couldn't wait for the kids to be back in school. They always talk about spending more time with their partner, and people were, at each other the whole time. So, I think people say a lot of things that sound good, but they really aren't. But they don't mean them.
Shaquille, use the word illicit. Sparrow, is there any downside to these things? Or is there any harm to the body, possibly overdosing or interacting with other chemicals or alcohol?
Well, I mean, I rather than put them all in one basket, what I could say is about for most of the psychedelics, like mushrooms, ayahuasca, I think also LSD, there are no actual physically harmful effects of those things.
They're benign?
Yeah. I mean, there's for virtually all compounds, not just psychedelics, but all medicine, there's a number. It's called the amount you would have to consume that would cause 50% of the people to die if they consumed that. The amount of mushrooms you would have to consume for half the people to die is about what consuming a 55-gallon oil drum full of.
No, I get that. So if there's only a benefit to it, there would be nothing wrong with that. People are just having it with their meals every day. Am I wrong? Like, why not?
Well, let's just put it this: anything can become addictive.
But you can't drink too much water and you eat too much bread, really.
Oh, okay. You can, Lee. Actually, you can.
Yeah,
if you drink too much water.
Water?
I mean, there are even a lot of things that are good for you. Like you probably know, exercise is good for you. Running's good for you. But if every day you're like running 35 miles and you're spending 8 hours of your day exercising, you're avoiding something, and you're using it to not deal with something in your life.
So using these things that you're talking about, are people avoiding other things in their life?
Again, I would not.
Can I say they did a study probably about 20 years ago on the use of mushrooms to treat PTSD in vets, and vets that had been struggling for quite a long time, and they actually got some really good success with it. I think Harvard actually released a report on it, but unfortunately in most Western countries, the government steps in and they get lobbied by pharmaceutical companies, and this stuff is illegal. And in my opinion, it shouldn't be. If there's a substance that can help somebody, they should actually be free to go out there and try it and use it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Hey, Sparrow, along those same lines, and I'm going to get to Jacoby. I did see your hand and everything. There are some that will use the argument, whether it's with cannabis or with some of the psychedelics or others, that it is the gateway to harder drugs and all in that kind of lane. So what is your answer to those folks that will give you that argument that if you get into these things, whether it's the psychedelics or whether it's the things like marijuana, that it could be leading into heroin and some of the other ones that can be harsher?
I think there's very little evidence for that, but there is one of the things I've learned, which is a really important principle, is whatever the situation or the event or the substance is, there are really two crucially important factors. Let's just say every time you're using something like this, one is called set and the other is called setting. Now, set is what's the purposes and motivation and intention you're using this for. That's set. And setting is, and what's the environment you're doing it in. So and let's just take an easy example. Suppose it's like LSD, what's the set? What's your purpose? Is it is it to find deeper parts of yourself? Is it to find why you're here in life? Is it to find what you're most passionate about? Is it to find new commitments? If that's your set, that's a very different set in terms of, I don't know what to do tonight and I want to party, you know. And the other is the setting, the environment you're in, which is, so it's very different being kind of alone on a private beach observing the ocean in the moonlight. That's different than being on a motorcycle riding down the Bayshore Freeway. So set and setting are important. And so I think so much of what happens in a psychedelic session depends on set and setting. And the thing I always want to say is, when I led Vision Quest, or when I do lead Vision Quest, okay, the core part of that is the 4 days and nights alone in wilderness. But there's 3 days of preparation before that happens, and there's 3 days of integration going through it afterwards. So the idea of, I'm going to do it every day, that is like a really bad set to have, because okay, you want to really focus on why am I doing. If you want to learn, or if you want to heal, or you want to improve your life, it's really important to take some time and ask those questions. Why am I doing it? What do I need to heal? And to really go deeply into that. And then after the experience, which maybe virtually always won't be rational and logical. I mean, sometimes the message is clear, but to take the time to really integrate it, to say, here's what happened, and then have some kind of environment in which you have help in translating that into the life you're leading now and how it can help. So yeah, I mean, I am not an advocate at all of just popping pills here and there every day. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jacoby, you had a question, and I had a observation I was going to make, and then hear Sparrow's comment to the observation. But Jacoby, I turn it over to you for a minute.
So, I mean, I might need one of those vision quests right now because I'm on dad duty and it's killing me. But so the I guess it sounds as if these vision quests. I mean, the way. Well, let me see if I can get it out the right way that I want to say it. So it sounds like this is all a search for that inner peace and trying to find that one thing that's driving that individual to do particularly bad things or feel like their world is crashing. So it sounds like these are healthy in that sense, which is similar to many forms of psychology or psychiatry. Can you do these vision quests without the help of chemistry and find these things without that use of LSD or use of any habitual to put your mind in that state? Can this just be done naturally?
Yeah, my answer is I've been leading Vision Quest since 35 years, since 1987. A Vision Quest virtually never involves psychedelics. The things that produce the altered state are solitude, fasting, and nature. So in a quote unquote Vision Quest, quote medicine, plant medicines, psychedelic are virtually never part of a Vision Quest. So
I think one of the problems, and I'll speak for myself alone, because I mean, not having the full knowledge of this area, one of the things that I get caught up in is seeing that stereotype. When you think about the Native American Vision Quests, you first see, a peace pipe. That's what you hear about. So, and Cheech and Chong talking about having peyote and going on these quests. So I mean, I think this is, learning more about this whole arena is actually really neat, because I mean, it opens up. That's why, I wanted to ask that question about, can this be done without having the use of chemistry? Because again, my whole knowledge of it, Family Guy, he goes on a Vision Quest, what they're doing on the Vision Quest and the Family Guy, Cheech and Chong, like I just said. So yeah, I mean,
I'm playing along that same line. That's actually what I was ready to get to. It's kind of where Jacoby was mentioning. There is a stereotype that exists with Vision Quest, which is that you will have what amounts to, in some people's mind, hallucinations and all in that space. And then they're wondering how much are you really getting in tune with nature? Because I've heard you mention nature several times, and I love having done it in the last couple of days, even though I need to get out on a nature walk today. But definitely I enjoy just the in touch with the nature, whether it's the trees, the rabbits, whatever else might be out there and everything. But there is this notion that you might start seeing things that aren't there if you have the enhancement tools that go with it and everything. And I know that's kind of the stereotype that I think Jovi was alluding to. So what is your answer to those folks that are concerned about that stereotype that exists, that you're going to have what you are visioning or what you are seeing is not real and it's a hallucination?
Well, I mean, partly I want to get into the kind of the profound philosophical parts of this, but that might not be useful. But I almost want to say most of what we see every day is imaginary. And let me just give an example. I mean, we're here. We are on the internet on this, and at least where I am, I'd say it's Thursday around 10:30 a.m. And obviously, people like Jatovi are in Australia, and it's not.
She kills it in Australia, but yeah, I get the point.
But the point is, we have arranged our whole lives all around the world based on the idea of a week. Where does this idea that there is a recurring 7-day cycle, which we call like Sunday through Saturday, where does that exist in reality? That exists only in the human mind.
But there is a source in the Bible, is there not?
Well, sure. Yeah, the Hebrews had the whole thing of the Sabbath. You kind of work and do whatever for 6 days, and then on the seventh you rest. But that idea of it, I mean, in other words, in physical objective reality, there is a cycle of the day, which is determined by the spinning of the earth and the sun rising in the east. There is an actual cycle of a year, the amount of time it takes for the earth to revolve around the sun. Those are, in some sense, have a basis in physical objective reality, but a week doesn't. That's something we create in the human mind. We all agree on it, and it becomes essentially one of the central parts we organize our lives around. And obviously, the same is true. We all have the idea that, we're very, multi-continents here, but, I live in Vermont. I have the idea that, if I walk 180 miles north, I'll be walking through the woods, and then, in one moment, I'll be in Canada. I mean, again, most of what we live our lives on are imaginary concepts, things like money and what it means, and corporations. Those are all imaginary concepts. But because we all agree on the rules, they become, essentially the basis of the social reality that we live in. What happens on a Vision Quest is, you're introduced to, basically on a Vision Quest, what happens is it's an interaction between two realities. One is the primal reality, the world of rocks, trees, whatever, that exists objectively. Whatever I think about it doesn't change it. I may decide not to believe in gravity, but I will, if I, step off a bridge, I'll fall at the same rate as people who do believe in gravity. So there is the primal objective world, and there is my inner subjective world, which is my hopes, my dreams, my inner longings. And in the Vision Quest, it's a profound interaction between, our own inner reality, this sense of who I am, my values, my dreams, and the outer reality, which has created human beings over the years, without all of that stuff about social reality, the download of the culture. So, so I did wander off into the philosophical aspects of it.
No problem at all.
The whole question of
Completely understand.
Yeah.
talking about man-made constructs and
Yeah.
Now here's a question: can you do, because there's this big thing about a silent room, and I know there are the stereotype again about actors going into just these facilities. There was actually Black Mirror just did an episode about the guy who created this giant social media company, and he wanted to get away, and his best way that he does that is on a vision quest. But how he does it, he basically has this room that's on top of a building or on top of a mountain that he just sits there in a silent room, so he's kind of separated from that. But the point I was trying to get to is they have created this one room that's considered the most silent room out there, where it's fully soundproof and people walk in and can't really spend more than 24 hours in there, evidently. Are you an advocate for people trying to use like buildings or rooms to do these vision quests or find their centers in that way as well? Or is it just a nature thing?
Well, for me, and I'm not trying to be an avatar for everyone else, but obviously, if you go to a meditation retreat, you're in some sense isolating yourself from part of the human download. People on meditation retreats, I think, are not checking their cell phones every night to stay tuned to it. So there is some value from removing oneself from the human created environment. And there was, last year, I mean, Aaron Rodgers, the former, the quarterback formerly for the Green Bay Packers, he did a 4-day retreat in complete darkness. There are these places created. So yeah, there you can humanly create a place that doesn't have sound. You can humanly create a place that doesn't have light, and certainly most meditation retreats are, there are silent meditation retreats, and in some sense, those force you to deal with what's going on inside of you, your inner dialogue, the constant repetition of these thoughts. So I mean, obviously all of those things can be great learning opportunities. For me, I just partly because I've always loved being in nature. But what happens, and the difference is, you're not in nature, you're removing yourself from all the human elements, but you're still engaging with something. So what I might say about that is, you could create a room of darkness or a room of silence, and what's there, what will be present there, is your inner life.
Hey, Sparrow, along those same lines, if you look on the internet, and I've definitely seen a couple of these things that I'm going to mention, you will see meditation spaces and soundtracks that mimic nature, and they will try to get you to use them to get a good night's sleep or something along those lines. You will also see, and I've got friends in this lane, folks that will create a vision quest in the metaverse and all along those spaces. So as one that is an advocate of nature, what do you think of, or what are your thoughts when people are using the technology to create vision quests? Because in a lot of ways, I would argue that the metaverse can be a vision quest as well. But I was just wondering what it would be your take on that, and definitely even some of these sound things. Like, you can definitely get your phone and you can download something that can give you that ambient sound that's supposed to relax you in the way that a vision quest does.
Sure, but I mean, it's kind of like, if I walk into nature, and wherever it is, in canyons, mountains, and I go alone, I will encounter something, and I will encounter something. But when I encounter something that is beyond myself and my inner dialogue, beyond my inner subjective reality in nature, when I encounter something, then I may call it the great mystery. I may call it Gaia, but I will not call it Elon Musk. I will not call it Matt Zuckerberg. In other words, it's one thing if I, the fundamental aspect of prayer, it's a lot of people pray to different things. They pray to Allah, or they pray to Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever it is. But my sense of prayer to me is an offering from the known to the unknown. And let me just explain that a little bit. So when I pray from what gets labeled sparrow. And what sparrow is all the known. So I might pray, please help me to blah, 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 blah. Please help me to do. So there were really two prayers. One is some version of help me, and the other is some version of thank you. But ultimately, a prayer is from the known to the unknown. So when I pray, I'm praying out of my personal longings, which may have been determined by my childhood wounds, or it may have been determined by the experiences, my personal history. And when I pray, I use the language that I've learned, which for me would be English and its set of concepts. So whenever I'm praying from the known, or what's known to me. But what I'm praying to is beyond all that. I'm reaching out to something beyond the self that I know. And that's the fundamental aspect of prayer. So when I do that in wilderness, or when I do that in nature, I'm actually praying to my sense of what has created me. So what but if I'm trying to go from what's known to the unknown, and all of that's been created by a social media company, it seems like it's pretty depressing to think about.
Definitely.
On a fun note, because you brought up walking into nature and you encounter, what you may not know what you may encounter. Can you give us some examples of some odd things or some fun things that you've encountered when not like a mountain lion? I hope you didn't encounter a mountain lion or a wild boar, but just some fun things that you may have encountered.
I actually have encountered those things, but well, actually, can I talk about one of those situations which a lot of people would consider dangerous?
Yes, please.
Do it. This is the fun part.
Okay, yeah, the fun part. So I remember in 1996, I was doing my own vision quest. I wasn't leading a group. I was going out in southwestern New Mexico in a place called the Gila Wilderness. It's actually spelled Gila, but in Spanish, the G is, pronounced like an H. The Gila Wilderness. And maybe on my second day out on my solo, I walked downstream, and I was just, crossing the river many times, walked downstream. But on my walk back, I came up this bank, and I was kind of walking, and there were these kind of enormous oak trees that would come up and had these really spread out on these long horizontal branches. And I was just walking through the meadow, and I heard this noise up in one of those trees, and I looked up, and there was some animal up there, and it was like, I can't get, anyway, it was probably about, 2 feet long and a foot and a half high. I was just looking at that, and I just was standing there looking at it. I mean, it turned out it was a young cub, a baby bear, and then just looking at it, and then all of a sudden I heard this other noise, and on another branch, all of a sudden its mother saw me. And when she saw me, she just took off like, bat out of hell, running along that branch and down the trunk and hit the ground and was charging full speed at me. And, it was one of those, I guess you would call it, oh shit moments.
So the cocaine bear moment.
Well, I didn't see the movie, but I kind of thought it would be fun to see. But anyway, so here I am, and I learned something that I was happy to learn. So on the one hand, all of a sudden,
You learned you can run faster than a bear.
No, I didn't learn that at all because you can't run faster than a bear. So all of a sudden, here it was, and so I started to slowly back away, because really, what you're supposed to do is to slowly back away. And oh, here it was happening. But what happened in me was fascinating, because all of a sudden I'm in the situation. It was almost like I split in two, and there was part of me on the right side that I could feel the valve that controlled the adrenaline just getting turned really fast. And so I could feel this part of me on my right side that was like really just getting supercharged. But on this other side of me, and that was the part that I was totally aware of, what happened was I had this attitude, well, you always wondered when it would happen. Here it is. There's this sense of we always wonder how we'll die and where we'll die. It was like, well, you always wondered, and here it is. And there was this part of me that was completely calm, present, not upset at all. And I just, continued to slowly back away. And at some point, as I slowly backed away, I kind of came, all of a sudden there was this small thicket of trees between me and this charging mother bear. And I backed away, and she never came through it. And I could still hear her, because I'm sure you guys don't know this, but at least down there among the black bears, it's not just that they're coming towards you. There's also they do this sound like it's a big huffing sound, but each huff is louder, so it's like hoo hoo hoo, and so the whole sound is like coming in this wave towards you, and I just kept backing away, and she never came through. And the funny part was, not funny, but interesting part is, I backed down the bank and it was back in the river. And I just kind of walked up the river. I walked up the river, and then it came up on the bank till I was behind her. There was a huge fallen cottonwood tree, and I just sat down and I watched her from behind, and she was still in front of that thicket, snarling and everything. And I was there watching her. So, but yeah, on the one hand, that was, part of me was certainly physically responding to it, but I discovered something about myself, which is, before that happened, I thought, oh my God, I'd be terrified. I'd be shitting in my pants, or whatever your image of being terrified is. But it actually was not true. And that's been incredibly comforting to me over the years, that
I can tell you,
I can get I can get afraid of a bunch of other things, like everybody does, of getting a cancer diagnosis. But it tells me, when I think about it, I'll be terrified, but I'll probably be fine.
I can tell you that my two halves was split apart. The valves would have been pushing out some poop in my pants. The other half would have been seeing myself poop in my pants and been sad that this is the last thing that's going to happen to me, is me pooping in my pants.
Well, what I would say to you is, that's the picture you have today. If you were in that situation, it might not be true.
Hey, Sparrow, along those same lines, because you're talking about Vision Quest, have you ever had any experiences? Because one of the buildings that I work at is definitely known for having some ghostly ties, and all along those lines, it is a historical building, and definitely I have even heard footsteps and everything that cannot be explained, other than there is a spirit that is out there. So on your Vision Quest, have you encountered the ancestors, and how was it that you encountered the ancestors?
Yeah, what I've noticed over the years is I'm a person who tends to look at things in a more abstract and broad way. And so to me, I've never been a person who said, oh yeah, there are spirits, and there are these kind of spirits, and you address them that way, and there are those kind, and there's the spirits that are your ancestors, and the spirits of those who are still to come and haven't been born. I've never been that kind of person. I more have the, I tend to have this kind of bigger, more abstract view. But I've definitely, what I've definitely felt like is there's a way if you're familiar with the term the collective unconscious, I mean, Carl Jung made
the
that.
U.S. Congress, right?
Yeah. Carl Jung made that term really popular. So, say, for example, I mean, we now know, because we're going to insert these minute cameras into a woman's womb and watch a fetus develop. We now know that the fetus kind of, first you have 2 cells, then 4, then 8, then 16. But at some point that fetus develops gills and fins and a tail. It goes through a whole kind of fish. And then obviously all of that gets reabsorbed, and hopefully the kid comes out with fingers and toes, the right number. But there's the sense that I do have the sense that what lives inside of me is ancient. And I've definitely felt the connection. I feel the connection to ancient parts of me, so that certainly as maybe I run into the reptile world, snakes and I have a sense of some kind of sense of some kind of familiarity with that. And so my sense of familiarity is to much more to the whole kind of human drama and life drama of evolution, rather than the particular 1,000 different versions that could take.
That makes a lot of sense. By the way, the 2 founders of the network are both here. You've been having one of them the whole time, which is Nick Palveda, and all along those lines, and Kim Calhoun just joined as well. So I don't know if they've got any thoughts or questions about Vision Quest and just the notion of what you are all about and all along those lines. I think that Kim told me that she's gone on a couple of these, if I remember correctly, in our conversation and all along those lines. I don't know if Nick's ever been on one, but definitely any questions, Kim and Nick, around this thought of Vision Quest and nature and some of the other things that we've been talking about.
Well, my thoughts when he was talking about the quest for unconscious or unconscious behavior, all I could think about is Congress. What can I tell you?
And I'm presuming
do you think that they're currently on a hallucinogenic quest, or do they need to?
They're definitely. I don't know if you saw what happened to Mitch McConnell today, but it looks like he was
very sad.
For about
that was weird. That was really weird the way he sort of stood a couple of days ago, where he stood on the podium and then he sort of had to be. It's like his brain just froze. Sparrow, I'd like to ask you about the
that's been happening for years. We finally caught it on tape, Shaquille. So it's been going on for years. Got it on tape.
Sparrow, I'd like to ask you about the legalities of it. We sort of touched on it earlier.
I like the idea of a silent room. I have to put that up there because I think it's a great idea. It just doesn't work for these people on Pod TV. Okay, I've tried it. It doesn't work. They're not very good at being silent. In terms of a Vision Quest, I don't know if they have any visions at all. But
Nick, there's a mute button.
There is a mute button. And
there's a mute button.
Oh, there's a mute button.
There's a mute button, and I think Shaquille had a couple of quick questions. But definitely, we'll have you mute yourself and all along those lines and everything. So, Shaquille, you had some questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Sparrow.
Okay, he does. All right.
Yes, I've got a question.
I just wanted to ask Sparrow about the legalities of it. People would like to go on one of these. Is there? I don't know all the laws in America. Obviously, I'm not American. Do they need to go to a special kind of centre like yours in order to be able to do this legally, or is it just a grey area? Or what do people have to do to?
You mean the legalities of Vision Quest?
Yes.
Oh, God, of using LSD or mushrooms or anything like that.
Yeah, well, in terms of Vision Quest, they're totally illegal. It's just there's no question of legality around doing a Vision Quest. Around psychedelics, LSD, it varies a lot state to state. Probably generally in most states, psychedelics are still illegal. I think in Oregon it's not, and there are certain cities like Denver and which is not. But it's very similar to a situation over the last decade or so. You know, I think 20 years ago, marijuana was illegal in most every state, and now it's legal in more than half the states. So, and I think psychedelics is kind of in that process, but it's definitely technically illegal in most states. Yeah.
But then again, I've always had a problem with that. But I've been on drugs all my life for different medical reasons. Why would somebody who's in good physical health want to put themselves into a drug situation when there are people like myself that I'm forced to take it because I'm not in great health? So it always bothered me, unless you have a mental condition, which is all I can think of. The reason you do that, I'm sorry, you're self-medicating due to a mental condition. Other than that, if you're a normal, healthy being, you're not.
Well, Nick, let me answer that question. Let me answer that question.
It's the same reason why people drink, Nick. People drink to escape a reality situation. I mean, and taking these drugs help you escape that reality.
That the reality is it's a mental condition, and you're using that to self-medicate. If you're in good physical and mental health, you're just not going to use drugs.
Can I ask a question? Why are those drugs not any better than the pharmaceutical? You know, because they always say, "Oh, these are illegal," but majority of the pharmaceutical probably, you know, take some of those anyway. But I mean, who makes that decision of what's legal, what's not? Who makes the decision of what's
the government?
The government, which means we do. We make those decisions.
Well, let me just say, at least probably in most, in terms of who makes that decision, it kind of depends on what country you live in.
Right.
I mean, one of the best examples is there's a psychedelic called ayahuasca. It pretty much comes from the jungle. It's Amazonian, and for example, ayahuasca in the United States is a class 4 drug, which is, the equivalent of heroin or crack cocaine or whatever. If you went to Peru, ayahuasca has been declared a national heritage plant. It's kind of part of their national heritage. And so, I think for me, and I don't want to get into I don't want to get into a lot of political arguments about it. But for me, I think I would say for me, the big issue is personally, and is that, if you are a relatively healthy and sane and have a person with a good sense of yourself, it's at least in the country I live in, the United States, it's illegal for the government to tell me what I can and can't read. It's illegal for the government to tell me what I can and can't say. It's illegal for the government to tell me what religion or church I can or can't go to. But it's legal for them to tell me what I choose to put in my body in service of my own kind of growth and expansion of my awareness. For me, it's more kind of a religion. It's kind of a government, and it's a freedom of religion or a freedom of. For me, that's my personal issue around it. I can certainly understand making restrictions on not using it when you're driving a car or farm machinery, or for kids who are teenagers or whatever. But I think most of the people I see on this channel here consider themselves adults and are probably very protective of our rights to be who we are and do what we want to do. And I don't think anyone in this circle that I'm seeing is going to immediately go out and shoot up a post office or do whatever. It's just so I think we're very kind of defendant of our rights to do things that feel sane and important within our value system. So
I agree with you on that. And one of the things I have learned is a lot of times people go out and they have started experimenting with these other alternatives, and they're finding cures from them. Even a cure from the drug that they use to induce in people when they have OD'd. I forget the name of it, but anyway, they're finding that various applications of that, a low dose of that, will actually help with pain, mental illness, many other things.
Yeah.
So thank you for your story.
Appreciate that. And definitely, I think Shaquille had a point as to why people do it and everything. So I think I was going to defer to him for a minute.
It's a bit late now, Mark. We
can go over it about a minute too, because some of the shows have been about 106 or 110.
We've moved on. The topic has moved on, so that's no problems.
Cool, no problem.
One of the things that I would add is when I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, when he talked about psilocybin research, one of the things I learned, which actually shocked me at a time, was I used to think psilocybin or mushrooms or psychedelics was, you took the substance and then it induced all of this extra brain activity. And that's why you had the lights and the cool, groovy fractal colors and this and that. But his research said, no, it didn't introduce more brain activity. You had less brain activity. Because what had happened is, he said, there were these particular neural structures that are interrelated and connected that make up what he called the default mode network, which he said there is this network in you, that in each of us, that kind of always eliminates certain information so we can stay in the bounds of what's considered normal. And when you take psychedelics, it actually suppresses that system. It's like it suppresses the filters. It suppresses the sensors. And it suppresses. So what happens on mushrooms is you're not getting stuff that isn't, you're getting what's there all the time that you don't notice. So it's actually, it's almost illuminating what's actually going on with you that you never see or get to hear most of the time. So that's what I found most interesting about it.
Well, definitely, we appreciated you being on the show today. This has been another edition of the World Edition. Great to get out here. We got some other shows like Barbara Smith will be coming on with Empowering You at noon and everything. But definitely, Sparrow, if you've got any final thoughts that you want to share before we get out of here. And it looks like Jacoby's got a final thing he wants to say as well. So Jacoby, go for it before we get out of here.
Well, the last thing I want to say is thank you to all of you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and that's been great. Yeah.
Since it sounds like we're about to end the show, we can't end on like a low note. We got to end on a happy note. And I brought in the movie the other day, which is one of my favorite movies. So Sparrow, you're meaning to tell me that when you're on your vision quest, or anybody on their vision quest hasn't come back to you with their meaning of life, and that meaning of life wasn't The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, number 42?
It was 42. I thought it was 46.
42, 46. It's one of the other.
42. I always remember that line.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on. I think everybody else has as well. And hopefully you'll make a return trip. And it sounds like you've enjoyed the conversation also. So we'll have you back again, hopefully in the not too distant future. But right now we're going to get on out of here. And I hope that you will make a return trip at some time or another.
I'd love to. All right. Thanks, Mark. And thanks to all the rest of you.
No problem.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah.